In the past few weeks, I've gotten accused of being AI more than my entire career on YouTube. The first reason is kinda justified. In a recent video, I mispronounced the word pirating as pirating, which for some reason is how I've always pronounced it and heard it be pronounced. Then amongst all these lawsuits, the iPod releases and the potential for pirating music exploded. The pirating, I just can't. It's AI. Even the cadence of this whole video screams AI. Pirating? You an AI, bro? AI is getting out of hand. If not for pronunciation of pirating instead of pirating, I would have thought this was a human channel. Then there was what I thought to be a less justified reason. In that same video, I mispronounced the word LimeWire, which is how I've always pronounced it, and that's the correct pronunciation, as limeware. Applications like LimeWire allowed users that same P2P sharing experience, once again giving consumers the opportunity to load their iPods with hundreds of free MP3s. And people somehow thought that second mistake connected to me being AI. This initially perplexed me. Why would me messing up a word that badly be taken as a sign that I'm AI more than if I pronounced all the words perfectly and fluently? Like, how could an AI mess up words to that degree? But I think I figured out why people feel that way. Because I pronounce things and speak with a cadence and tone similar to AI, perhaps more so than the average person, any mispronunciation is taken as further proof that my voice is an AI machine with flaws in it, rather than evidence of human error. Imagine that, under certain conditions, making mistakes is now indicative of not being human. But even in a video where I didn't mispronounce anything, I still got accused of being AI. Listen, I kinda get it. My face doesn't really match my voice, right? And I tend to inject my voice with a little more charisma to keep you engaged for these videos. But regardless, this is scary. I feel like there's not much I can do at this point to not get accused that my voice, my scripts, or even my face is AI generated. And it might not be long before the average person posting on social media is accused of being AI as the lines between what's real and what isn't continue to blur. So today I want to discuss the implications of this, how AI influencers could reshape the landscape of social media, push misinformation and truth past the point of no return, and what it might take to determine whether anything is real in the future. The basis for the ideas and implications I'm going to discuss comes from French philosopher Jean Baudrillard's essay, Simulacra and Simulation. And to explore these properly, it's important to first understand what simulacra even means and why it's so prevalent in our modern world. A simulacrum, boiled down to a single definition, is a copy of something that no longer has an original. Here's the example that Baudrillard uses to make that idea clearer. Imagine you're in a territory, say the state of New York, and someone creates a map at a 1:1 scale of it. The map is laid over New York, completely covering it. Now the original New York is effectively replaced by this copy. People begin to walk across the map, and over time it starts to wear down. Pieces tear away and blend into the actual territory beneath until it becomes more and more difficult to tell which parts are the map, aka the copy, and which parts are the real New York. Now imagine that everyone who was alive before New York was replaced by this 1:1 map has died, and no one living has ever known a world without the map covering it. Eventually, the map becomes New York. To its inhabitants who have never known anything else, the representation of New York is as real, or in some cases more real, than the real New York that existed before the map was placed on top of it. That's essentially what a simulacrum is, a representation that stops pointing to an original reality and instead becomes reality in its own right. You can already begin to see how this relates to artificial intelligence. In its current form, AI is largely a copy or representation of human intelligence. It's trained on an amalgamation of humanity's texts and ideas, learning to replicate our mannerisms and language in a very particular way. In that sense, AI becomes a simulacrum of humanity. And as more and more of daily life involves interacting with artificial intelligence, it begins to resemble the 1:1 map of New York. Given enough time engaging with it, the line between human and artificial intelligence blurs until the artificial becomes indistinguishable from humanity itself. This concept is a bit tricky to understand at this point in the video, I know, and there's so much going on in the modern world that requires us to just push slop into our retinas and keep us in a constantly emotionally dysregulated, stressful state, and that's why I think it's so important to have some sort of mindfulness meditation practice every day. Something I've been using for a long time now to reduce my stress around all this stuff and focus on what I can actually control is today's sponsor, Headspace. So I've been meditating for about 8 years now, and if I had to point to one of the most important practices that has increased my self-awareness and led me towards being the most physically, mentally, and financially stable I've ever been, it would be mindfulness meditation. I personally use Headspace 5 minutes in the morning when I wake up and 5 minutes right before bed. There's a meditation called Jumpstart Your Day, and the guide's calming voice paired with the intentional breathing exercise helps me relinquish any negative thoughts I may have started the day with, and more importantly, makes the stressful situations I'll inevitably face throughout the day much easier to handle. Just take a second to listen, I guarantee it'll help.
As you breathe in, that idea of taking in fresh air as the lungs expand. And as you breathe out, just noticing how the muscles in the body soften and relax.
My emotional regulation after listening to this is so dialed in for the rest of the day. At night, I use the deep breathing for stress relief meditation. I can literally feel my entire body melt when I'm done with this one. And on days where I don't end up doing this, there's a noticeable difference in how quickly my thoughts move and how much I toss and turn in bed before I fall asleep. If you're someone who doesn't meditate right now because you feel like you don't have the time, to be honest, you don't need the time. Everyone has 5 minutes in their day to replace their doom scrolling with, and just that 5 minutes will completely transform your mindset. It still blows my mind to this day how effective meditation is. So if you want to keep your stress levels in check and slow down in a world that is constantly shouting at you to speed up, you can try Headspace entirely for free for 60 days by clicking the link in my description or scanning the QR code that you see on screen. It's 2 months full of free access compared to the standard 2-week trial available on their website. So now that we know what a simulacrum is and what it entails, there are 4 distinct phases of simulacra that will allow me to expand upon my explanation. The first phase of simulacra is a basic reflection of reality. A good example of a phase 1 simulacrum is a lemon. A lemon isn't trying to be anything other than a lemon. It isn't a copy of something else, it's just a lemon. Phase 2 simulacra is a perversion or masking of reality. If we continue with our lemon example, a phase 2 simulacrum would be a lemon pie. The pie still has lemon in it, but it's been altered to serve a different purpose, that of being enjoyed as a dessert. Phase 3 is where signs and symbols begin to take over. This is when a simulacrum masks the absence of reality. Continuing the lemon example, a fitting Phase 3 simulacrum would be lemon jello. Lemon jello has the attributes and representation of a lemon without containing any lemon at all. You're reminded of a lemon, but no lemon actually exists. Lastly, Phase 4 is called pure simulacra. A Phase 4 simulacrum would be lemon drop jello shots. It references an earlier representation, a previous perversion, then detaches even further from its original basic reflection of reality. Now, it's possible that someone could go their entire lives having never experienced an actual lemon, only its simulacrum, and maybe it's hard to imagine that someone would have only drank lemon drop jello shots throughout their life and never eaten an actual lemon, but just use your imagination. The point is, as more of reality gets replaced by these Phase 3 and Phase 4 simulacra, reality becomes less relevant, sometimes no longer considered at all. What begins to feel more real are the signs and symbols, the lemon drop jello shots, which muddy our sense of what is true and real. Over the past few decades, our reality has increasingly been filled with simulacra. Advertisements display lifestyles and ideals that people become hooked on, affecting the ways in which they perceive and conduct their lives. Social media then amplifies this effect, presenting curated versions of identity and experience that often matter more than the reality they supposedly represent. And in the case of artificial intelligence, it is leaning farther towards Phase 4 of simulacrum than ever before. AI began with the ability to answer very simple questions. Things like calculators, rule-based programs, and basic search engines reflected human logic without attempting to imitate human thought or expression. Then artificial intelligence began to pervert or mask reality. When it gained the ability to approximate human judgment through recommendation algorithms or early chatbots, it started to become more engaging and useful, kind of like the human it was meant to represent. Reality was still present, but it was filtered and optimized to fit human preferences. But Phase 3 felt like a point of no return. When chatbots became highly sophisticated and sycophantic, such as the release of ChatGPT, everyone started offloading some of their thinking, something that makes them more human, to these chatbots. And now that we've spent enough time in this phase, it's becoming almost impossible to determine whether a piece of content we see, especially online, was written by a human or generated by artificial intelligence. In other words, reality, that is, the thoughts and ideas derived from humans themselves, is no longer relevant or even considered because it has become so indistinguishable from what these systems can produce that the distinction itself begins to feel meaningless. And pretty soon, it's possible we're gonna see Phase 4 of Simulacra, what I'd consider photorealistic, indistinguishable video, voice, text, and even roboids, become the map laid over almost our entire reality. It's here that we enter total hyperreality, another term coined by Jean Baudrillard, which refers to simulations or images of reality that become indistinguishable from, or even more real than, reality itself. It's what happens when we've lived so detached from reality for so long that what counts as real is constantly shifting to match whichever representation has the most attention on it at any given time. Artificial intelligence social media accounts are like hyperreality inception. They operate on top of something that is already a hyperreality, a simulacrum of social life, and use it to generate even more simulacra. On social media, most things are already simulated representations of real life. Everyone is performing, which has made many of us skeptical of what's actually authentic in the first place. But with AI, the performance no longer even requires a person behind it. And as it continues to improve, and as we become increasingly aware of that improvement, this portrayal of reality makes us second guess nearly everything, while at the same time relying on that simulacrum for information about reality itself. The Grok is this true phenomenon on Twitter is a good example of how what is real and true can get pushed farther from its origins. If someone makes a bold claim on Twitter, you're already gonna be skeptical. People can tweet just about anything they want without consequences, unless it gets enough attention to the point where a community note gets slapped on it. So now, instead of tracing a claim back to its source, people ask Grok, the platform's chatbot, whether something is true in the replies. In doing so, verification itself becomes outsourced to the simulacrum. The Grok chatbot creates the new truth. And although one could argue that it's relying on the truth based on human data it was trained on, chatbots like Grok are still known to frequently get information wrong or hallucinate and pull information straight out of their robot ass. Now think about the feedback loop this creates. A person uses a chatbot to verify reality. They use that output to form new beliefs. Those beliefs then influence real-world behavior and discourse, the very material chatbots are later trained on to generate future truths. If this cycle continues long enough, truth becomes recursive and self-referential, increasingly detached from any stable origin, something constantly in motion and almost impossible to pin down at all. This also explains why some people have already started accusing me of being AI and why I don't really blame them for it. AI has gotten so good at mimicking our inflections, tone, and word choice that the cues that we used to rely on to tell human expression apart are starting to disappear. Add to the fact that more people are now hyper-aware of what sounds or looks like AI, and if you're guilty of even a few of those traits, you become the blur. The simulacrum people can no longer tell is real or not. It really feels like we're almost at the starting point of Phase 4, where soon, if this software becomes hardware and AI influencers no longer have anything human running it, it'll exist entirely untethered from lived experience. At that point, the simulation won't even be imitating reality anymore. It will operate independently of it, producing culture, opinions, and truths without ever having to pass through a human mind at all. And I'm not trying to fearmonger you here and have these hypotheticals that are just hypotheticals be implanted in your brain as like, this is absolutely what's gonna happen, but this is fucking scary and it's something we have to become aware of. We've already seen glimpses of this in the present day and the consequences of living in a hyperreality like this. Right now, most misinformation and propaganda are still being produced by humans, and because we spend so much of our lives on the platforms where they circulate, it's creating a fragmented society, one where agreeing on even basic facts feels more and more difficult. As that happens, social cohesion erodes, moral dilemmas multiply because it becomes harder to determine what's right or wrong. Social unrest grows because we know this is happening but feel powerless to stop it. And perhaps the most unsettling consequence of all is that language itself and the words we rely on begins to lose its meaning. The most relevant example I can think of are the terms boyfriend and girlfriend. Like, what do those words actually mean anymore? Their meaning has already begun to muddy. To some people, someone is not your boyfriend or girlfriend unless you or they have verbally asked you to be their boyfriend or girlfriend, and you or they have said yes. To others, people might see someone as their boyfriend or girlfriend if they've just been on a bunch of dates and they see each other often. The dissolution of a concrete meaning of these words has undoubtedly been fueled by a part of hyperreality, mainly social media and dating apps. But now, people are starting to form relationships and even marriages with their AI chatbots and avatars. Can we still call that AI a boyfriend or girlfriend to a real human, or does this stretch the definition of boyfriend and girlfriend to the point where these words no longer meaningfully describe anything at all? Now apply that same logic to almost everything. If people increasingly rely on a simulacrum to define what words mean, then meaning itself becomes something generated by something artificial, rather than lived and negotiated between real people. And when that happens, it not only causes all the consequences I previously stated, but it opens the door for all of us to become more easily manipulated, mainly by corporations who will exploit these shifting definitions to shape how we think, respond, and how divided we become. At that point, how we define something as real or true begins to dissipate entirely, as we can already see happening today, like with the accusations made against me. So now that we have a deeper understanding of this hyperreality we are entrenched in and how it's starting to affect the way we perceive and think about our basic reflections of reality, how the hell do we stop this from getting worse? Good freaking question. I love to post solutions at the end of my videos, but I don't think it's going to be anything I haven't already stated. You have to distance yourself from these platforms which create an abundance of simulacra and re-engage with places where humans have always established their definitions of truth. Rely more on physical media and textbooks rather than chatbots. And when you engage with this media, try to articulate what you've learned in your own words, rather than offloading that difficult work to a simulacrum designed to deliver quick, effortless answers at the cost of developing your own understanding. Engage with humanity in real life and discuss these ideas with humans more, instead of these artificially generated versions of these ideas. Developing your own thoughts based on what you've learned from reality, not this thing, and critically examining what the truth is and what it should be through meaningful discussion with other humans is your greatest rebellion against hyperreality. I recommend watching this video again to get these concepts to really stick inside your brain, and I know the modern world is overwhelming and I talked about some negative things here, so I really hope you take the time to relax and unwind on a daily basis using something like Headspace, which, like I said, link in the description for that. If you enjoyed this video, you'll probably like my video discussing what's been going on with education and AI and how AI is disrupting the education system. So check out that video if you'd like to, but also, like I said, take time to yourself, relax, stress-free, let's chill, things are gonna be fine, goodbye.